In 2019, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were celebrating their 35th anniversary. But they weren't the only ones hitting a milestone. Batman was also celebrating his 80th anniversary. To mark the occasion, Warner Bros. Decided to adapt the Batman TMNT comic book miniseries as a direct-to-video animated movie. However, the final product ended up looking much darker than the average Nickelodeon animation at the time, and it featured violence graphic enough to make more than a few parents angry. So, how did this tonal shift come to be? And what could Batman possibly learn from working with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? These are questions I'll try to answer today as I explore the Batman vs. TMNT movie. Batman and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles first crossed paths at the end of 2015 in the pages of a comic book miniseries that teamed the two properties together. Written by James Tynion IV and illustrated by Freddie Williams II, the story was originally meant to take place within the continuity of both franchises, but the timing simply wasn't right. At the time, the Shredder was dead, and Splinter had become the new master of the Foot Clan. Meanwhile, Bruce Wayne was missing, and Jim Gordon had taken over as Batman. With both universes undergoing major changes, the creative team decided it would be easier to tell the story as an Elseworld-style crossover. The gamble paid off. The first issue sold over 100,000 copies, making it a major success. It eventually spawned two sequels, along with a spin-off miniseries featuring the animated versions of both franchises. Because of that success, the idea of an animated adaptation quickly started circulating. At a certain point, rumors suggested that the animated universe crossover might be the one to make the jump to animation. So it came as a bit of a surprise when the decision was made to adapt the very first miniseries instead, as a direct-to-video animated movie produced by Warner Bros. Animation in collaboration with DC Entertainment and Nickelodeon Animation Studio. The screenplay was written by Marley Halpern Grazer, a writer known for his work on several Warner Bros. Animated series and films. The project was directed by Jake Castorina, who had recently worked on The Death of Superman. But long before that, he had built a career as a storyboard artist on shows like Batman, the Brave and the Bold, the 2012 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles series, Green Lantern, the animated series, Beware the Batman, and even Rise of the TMNT, as well as several DC animated movies. According to producer Ben Jones, one of the first steps in development was drawing a Venn diagram to determine what the two franchises had in common. The answer turned out to be surprisingly simple: a big city, martial arts, masks, and family. To capture that dynamic, Halpern Grazer structured the story around familiar tropes from buddy cop and romance films. Some characters were paired because they naturally got along, like Batgirl and Donatello. Others were complete opposites, like Michelangelo and Batman. And then there were the pairs that clashed precisely because they were so similar, like Raphael and Damian Wayne. Visually, the movie began to take shape when IDW TMNT artist Andy Kuhn produced the early character designs. These were later refined to better fit animation by lead character designer Stephen Choi, who was joined by Danny Kano Kamanian to complete the rest of the lineup. As development continued, many of the film's action sequences would actually be influenced by the character and set designs themselves, something we'll explore a little later. Voice recording for the film had already been completed before the movie was officially announced in February 2019. Many members of the cast were already familiar with DC animation, having worked on previous shows and movies connected to the franchise. Eric Bauza was the only actor who was also involved with the current Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles series at the time, where he voiced Splinter. However, none of the actors from the Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles show were allowed to reprise the Turtles themselves. Interestingly, Eric Bauza had already played Leonardo before. He voiced the character in the short Turtles Take Time and Space, and he had also played Donatello in the short Turtles vs. Raph. At one point, he had even auditioned for Raphael in the 2012 series, but the role ultimately went to Sean Astin after the producers decided that Astin's voice contrasted better with Jason Biggs' Leonardo. According to Bauza, Leonardo's voice in the movie was essentially his natural speaking voice, just slightly more hyped up. Andrew Kishino, who played the Shredder, was also no stranger to the franchise. In the 2012 animated series, he had previously voiced Fong, a member of the Purple Dragons. For this movie, he deliberately avoided imitating previous versions of the character. Instead, he let the design and personality guide his performance. The film also marked the first time an actor officially played both Batman and the Joker in the same project. Troy Baker had already been performing both voices behind the scenes. Once the producers noticed him, they decided to cast him in both roles. However, Baker later admitted that performing the Joker's voice could be extremely taxing, sometimes leaving him with a sore throat afterward. Producer Ben Jones, who had previously worked with both franchises, made an early decision that would significantly shape the adaptation. Instead of using the multiverse setup from the comic, he wanted both worlds to exist in the same universe, similar to the way old comic book crossovers were handled. This simplified the story and allowed the movie to focus more on action. Of course, removing the dimensional crossover also required major changes to the original plot, something I'll revisit later. Director Jake Castorina also had a clear vision for the film's tone. He wanted the Turtles to feel more lighthearted than Batman, but without making them overly goofy, like in the 1987 animated series. To strike that balance, he encouraged the crew to take inspiration from the 1990 live-action movie, which blended humor with a more grounded tone. As a result, the film contains several references to the original trilogy. The score for Batman vs. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was composed by frequent DC collaborator Kevin Ripple, whose music follows the darker, synth-electric guitar-heavy style often associated with DC animated projects, such as Batman Beyond and The Dark Knight Returns. Finally, once production was ready to move forward, the animation work itself was outsourced to a studio in South Korea, following the same production pipeline used by many Warner Bros. Animated films. Like the comic, the story opened with Barbara Gordon taking a tour of Powers Industrial. Her visit was cut short by the sudden appearance of the Foot Clan, who had come to steal a high-tech generator. She did her best to protect the scientists, but the threat was quickly resolved by the Turtles, who fought the ninjas in the dark and then vanished, leaving nothing behind. However, when everything had settled, the generator was gone. Barbara, who was secretly Batgirl, told Batman that she had seen 4 lizard-like men fighting in the shadows, implying that whoever these ninjas were, they also had metahumans working with them. This was enough for Batman to begin investigating the break-ins. At first, the League of Assassins seemed like a possible suspect, but according to Barbara, these attackers were someone new, so Bruce widened his search. Both the Turtles and Batman assumed the next logical target would be Wayne Enterprises. But they weren't the only ones who reached that conclusion. The Penguin noticed the same pattern and decided to break in first, hoping to negotiate with whoever this new criminal force in Gotham might be. However, he and his henchmen were intercepted by the Turtles, who believed they had been sent by the Shredder. The Turtles defeated Penguin's men, leaving him with no option but to escape. Meanwhile, the Foot Clan walked straight into a holographic trap set by Batman at Wayne Enterprises. Batman defeated the ninjas and attempted to interrogate one of them about their interest in an experimental device known as the Cloud Seeder. But the interrogation was interrupted when the Shredder arrived and killed the last foot soldier standing. Batman and Shredder engaged in battle and quickly realized they were evenly matched. Seeing that he needed an advantage, the Shredder used an ancient ninja technique to end the fight and escape. The Turtles, who had followed the Shredder all the way from New York, realized that the Penguin couldn't have been his new partner. On their way out, they ran into the Batmobile, and immediately after, Batman himself. The encounter led to the inevitable crossover fight. Batman ultimately won, forcing the Turtles to retreat back into the shadows. But the Dark Knight did walk away with one piece of evidence: Raphael's sigh. Meanwhile, the Shredder returned to his secret lair, where his reluctant assistant Baxter Stockman had been working on a mysterious machine. To his surprise, his new partner was already there waiting for him, Ra's al Ghul. Ra's had promised the Shredder a map to the Lazarus Pits in exchange for building a doomsday machine and providing him with a supply of mutagen. To test the formula, they injected one of Ra's al Ghul's assassins with the mutagen, which immediately transformed him into a mutant wolf. But unbeknownst to them, someone had been watching the entire experiment: Ra's grandson, Damian Wayne, aka Robin. At their temporary lair, the Turtles did some research on Batman and discovered that he only targeted criminals. They still suspected he might be Shredder's new partner, but to Leonardo it seemed like Batman had been avoiding lethal blows during their fight, almost as if he had been trying to figure them out. Meanwhile, Batman was still at Wayne Enterprises studying Raphael's DNA from the recovered Psi. His analysis revealed that the Turtles had been mutated by an outside agent, a mutagen. Batgirl realized that the technology the Foot Clan had stolen so far could be used to refine a mutagen like that. With that possibility in mind, it was fortunate that Bruce had already moved the Cloud Seeder to a secure location outside Gotham. Batman then began working on a retro mutagen. At the same time, the fact that the Turtles had left Penguin's men tied up for the police suggested they might not be allied with Shredder after all, so Batman and Batgirl decided to give them the benefit of the doubt. Using an algorithm to triangulate Batman's possible base of operations and factoring in natural cave formations around Gotham, Donatello eventually located the Batcave. After breaking into the Batcomputer, Donnie quickly realized that Batman had also been tracking the Foot Clan, which confirmed that they were on the same side. Before they could investigate further, they were ambushed by Robin. A short fight followed until Batman and Batgirl arrived. Once the misunderstanding was cleared up, Robin revealed what he had discovered about Shredder working together with Ra's al Ghul. Meanwhile, realizing that Batman and the Turtles were about to become a serious obstacle, Ra's decided to hire the Penguin to retrieve the Cloud Seeder, which allowed him and Shredder to focus on a different strategy to keep the heroes occupied. Their plan led them to Arkham Asylum, where they met with the Joker. In exchange for a sample of mutagen, the Joker provided them with his Joker Venom formula. When combined, the two substances could create a compound capable of mutating people and driving them completely insane. Back at the Batcave, the two teams slowly started bonding. Batman and Leonardo sparred, while Raphael and Robin talked about the League of Assassins and how Ra's al Ghul had spent decades trying to destroy cities and rebuild them in his own image. The mutagen was clearly a key part of that plan. Fortunately, Batgirl and Donatello had already managed to create a retro mutagen, or anti-ooze, capable of reversing mutations. However, the cure only worked within the first 12 hours. After that point, the DNA changes would become permanent. Leonardo also explained Shredder's secret technique to Batman. It was known as the Sato Oshi Strike, a powerful ninja move dating back hundreds of years and said to have been created by the founders of the Foot Clan. The technique focused all the body's energy into a single devastating blow, one that could prove lethal to both the attacker and the opponent. According to Leonardo, only two living ninja masters truly knew how to use it, Splinter and the Shredder. While the others focused on their preparations, the Turtles ordered some pizza, a culinary choice that Batman was clearly not thrilled about. He reminded Robin and Batgirl that their priority was stopping Raish, not wasting time on distractions. And their next move soon became clear. Commissioner Gordon contacted Batman with news of an attack at Arkham Asylum, along with a possible hostage situation involving ninjas. That immediately became their next mission, provided the Turtles were willing to follow Batman's orders. After mixing the ooze with water, the Joker mutated several inmates. He turned Harley Quinn into a hyena, Bane into a jaguar, Scarecrow into a crow, Two-Face into a two-headed cat, Mr. Freeze into a polar bear, Poison Ivy into a Venus flytrap, and he turned himself into a cobra. Once Batman realized what had happened, he decided to split the team to cover each wing of the asylum and release any potential hostages. Michelangelo, Raphael, and Robin faced Mr. Freeze. Batgirl and Donatello faced Bane, who unsuccessfully tried to break Donnie's back. Meanwhile, Batman and Leonardo confronted Scarecrow. During the fight, Batman had to guide Leonardo through the nightmare created by Scarecrow's fear gas, allowing him to defeat the villain. This was slightly unnecessary, as Batman already had the antidote, and only inoculated Leonardo after the fight. After escaping from Mr. Freeze, Mikey, Raph, and Robin ran into Poison Ivy. But since her new mutation had rooted her to the ground, they quickly realized she couldn't reach them, and simply walked around her. Meanwhile, Batman and Leo encountered Two-Face, who was holding two hostages at gunpoint. Unfortunately, this turned out to be a trap set by the Joker, and both Raphael and Leonardo, who disobeyed Batman's orders, were tasered as a result. To make matters worse, the heroes now had to face Joker, Harley, Two-Face, and Mr. Freeze at the same time. The situation quickly escalated, and Batman ended up trapped in ice. Seeing the perfect opportunity, the Joker injected him with a new formula. The mutation turned Batman into a Man-Bat, who couldn't even recognize his own allies. He began attacking everyone around him, until the team finally used the anti-ooze to reverse the transformation. By the end of the battle, both Joker and Harley were buried under the debris of the battlefield. The heroes could have stayed to cure the remaining inmates, but by that point, it had become clear that the entire Arkham incident had been designed to keep them distracted from the real objective. It had given the Penguin enough time to retrieve the Cloud Seeder and deliver it to Shredder and Ra's al Ghul. Unfortunately for him, instead of paying him for the job, the villains killed all of his henchmen. It didn't take long for the heroes to discover that the Cloud Seeder had been stolen and could be used to spread the new formula through the clouds, mutating the entire city. Having barely recovered from the fight, Bruce decided to kick the Turtles out of Gotham. In his view, they were too impulsive to follow orders, and their recklessness had nearly cost him his life. Leonardo disagreed. From his perspective, Batman had wasted time dealing with the Arkham incident when they should have been focused on stopping the Shredder. Ironically, the only one who managed to calm everyone down was Raphael. He reminded Batman that every time he tried to operate alone without his family, they eventually had to bail him out. Because of that, the only way to defeat Shredder and Ra's was to stay together and face them as a family. And family always gave each other a second chance. That argument finally convinced Batman to open himself up to the more impulsive methods of the Turtles. After fighting their way through mutated versions of the Foot Clan and the League of Assassins, the heroes finally reached the main villains and the Cloud Seeder. Leonardo and Donatello confronted Ra's al Ghul as they tried to shut down the machine. Batman faced the Shredder, while the rest of the team held back the two armies. During the fight, Ra's broke Donnie's right arm. As Donatello fell, he was accidentally thrown onto the flying machine itself. Seeing his brother trapped there, Michelangelo jumped in to help him. Despite having centuries of experience, Ra's was ultimately defeated by Leonardo. But Batman was still evenly matched with the Shredder. Batman tried using several gadgets to gain an advantage, but the Shredder eventually neutralized his utility belt, removing that option entirely. As he prepared another Sato Oshi strike, Oroku Saki revealed his plan. He intended to take control of the League of Assassins, gain immortality through the Lazarus Pits, and allow the Foot Clan to rule for 1,000 years. However, the attack was interrupted at the last moment when Raphael arrived after hearing Batman shout the code word, Cowabunga. The distraction gave Batman the opening he needed to finally defeat the Shredder. Meanwhile, high above the battlefield, Michelangelo struggled to figure out how to disable the Cloud Seeder. Unable to find a solution, he simply started destroying the controls as if he were playing a video game. The machine exploded, sending the turtles falling through the sky. Fortunately, they managed to land safely on top of one of Gotham's blimps. The damaged machine then crashed into Ace Chemicals, throwing the Shredder into a vat of Joker venom. As explosions spread through the facility, the heroes managed to escape while rescuing both Baxter Stockman and Ubu. With the mission finally over, Batman surprised everyone by ordering pizza. For once, even Batman and Robin joined the Turtles for a slice. But the story wasn't quite finished. In a post-credit scene, it was revealed that the Shredder had survived the explosion and had been Jokerized. According to producer Ben Jones, the starting point for the movie's action scenes was the classic Shaw Brothers martial arts films. The goal was to ground the story in an almost 1980s-style world, something that felt a little fantastical, but where the fights themselves still felt real. The team looked at several martial arts influences while developing the choreography, including Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan, and more modern action films like The Raid. The first crossover fight between Batman and the Turtles was storyboarded by Chris Copeland. His first task was figuring out how each turtle would actually fight. Raphael was imagined as the bruiser of the group, so Batman defeated him using jujitsu. Leonardo, on the other hand, fought like a disciplined samurai following Bushido, forcing Batman to become much more technical to counter the katanas. Michelangelo was treated as the wild card. Copeland described him as more like a breakdancer or skateboarder, someone who moved in unpredictable ways. From Batman's perspective, if one of these kids was going to jump off a rooftop trying to kick him, it was probably going to be Michelangelo. Because of that unorthodox style, Batman had to get creative, even defeating Mikey by punching his toes and grabbing him by the mouth. Donatello approached combat differently. He tried to apply logic and experimentation to his fighting style, but the scientific method of trial and error proved very painful in an actual battle. In contrast, Batman fought like a detective. He constantly searched for weaknesses and then used his opponent's own techniques against them. That was why he could exploit small details during the fight, like throwing Leonardo by pulling on his bandana. Robin also had a small character arc in the action scenes. During the Batcave encounter, he briefly used Donatello's own bow staff against him, and by the final battle, he had brought his own staff, effectively teaming up with Donnie during the fight. Ra's al Ghul was designed to act as a dark reflection of Master Splinter. He was disciplined, experienced, and extremely effective in combat. Since he also fought with a sword, it made sense to pair him against Leonardo. Ironically, despite centuries of experience, Ra's was ultimately defeated in a very unorthodox way. Leonardo kicked him in the groin, something the villain would never have expected in a traditional martial arts duel. The moment was not originally scripted, but the director felt it made sense for a 16-year-old fighter to react that way, something Batman himself probably wouldn't have done. The first fight between Batman and the Shredder was storyboarded by the director himself. The scene was meant to highlight Shredder's ego. After cutting Batman's rope, he could have simply escaped, but instead he felt insulted and stayed to fight. From there, both characters constantly adapted to each other, using their surroundings and their weapons to counter every move. Since they appeared so evenly matched, the filmmakers decided to give Shredder an additional advantage, an almost unbeatable technique. This move became the Satoshi Strike, named after the founders of the Foot Clan from the Mirage comics, and it followed the tradition of Shaw Brothers martial arts films, where a master possessed a nearly unstoppable technique. When Batman fought the Shredder again in the final act, he changed his approach. Instead of relying on pure martial arts, he used more gadgets and direct punches to counter Shredder's technique. The final battle itself was largely built from the environment of Ace Chemicals. The script only described the heroes fighting mutated ninjas, so most of the action beats were developed directly through the storyboards. Storyboard artists like J.J. Conway designed the fight around the location's geography, creating a sequence that grew progressively more dangerous as the heroes fought increasingly powerful mutants as they moved through the factory. One of the earliest decisions during development was to remove the dimensional element from the original comic. Instead of traveling between universes, the movie treated both franchises as if they had always existed in the same world. This immediately changed the nature of the story. In the comic, the plot revolved around an invasion coming from another dimension. In the movie, the conflict became a criminal conspiracy involving Shredder and Ra's al Ghul. Despite that change, the filmmakers still tried to preserve as many recognizable elements from the comic as possible. Small details, like the scene atop the T-Rex, were kept to help fans clearly recognize that the movie was still adapting the original story. Writer James Tynion IV was consulted during the adaptation process, and removing the multiverse element also allowed the filmmakers to include more action scenes throughout the story. Some of the character mutations were also changed for the film. In the comic, Bane was transformed into an elephant, while in the movie he became a jaguar, which was arguably a more fitting choice for the character. Other villains also received different mutations. In the comic, Two-Face had been turned into a monkey, and Poison Ivy had become a praying mantis. For the movie, Ivy's transformation was changed into a Venus flytrap. Interestingly, Tynion later admitted he liked the idea and would probably have written something similar himself. The concept was possible, partly because the 2012 TMNT series had already established that plants could be mutated, something Tynion had not originally considered. There were also several characters present in the comic who didn't appear in the movie. Splinter played a role in the original story, and Casey Jones eventually joined the action. The Penguin's fate was also slightly different in the comic, where he ended up being mutated into a literal penguin. Even with these differences, many scenes from the comic were still adapted into the movie. The writer frequently returned to the original arc for inspiration, drawing on several of its milestones and character motivations. As a result, while the movie and the comic followed very different plots, they ultimately told stories that shared many of the same key moments. Batman vs. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was officially announced in February 2019 through the DC blog. The film later premiered at WonderCon, where a panel featuring cast and crew members discussed the project. Among those present were Troy Baker, Cass Anvar, Eric Bauza, Ben Giroux, Andrew Cascino, producer Ben Jones, director Jake Castorina, and writer Marley Halpern-Grazer. The movie was released digitally on May 14, 2019, coinciding with a third comic book miniseries. Interestingly, the film also marked a small milestone for the franchise. It became the first Nickelodeon animated movie to receive a PG-13 rating, and only the third TMNT movie overall to do so, after the two Platinum Dunes live-action films. The physical release followed shortly after. The DVD and Blu-ray editions were released in June, and also included a 4K UHD version. In terms of home media performance, the film did fairly well within the direct-to-video market. Estimated domestic DVD sales reached around $609,000, while Blu-ray sales were estimated at roughly $3.01 million, bringing the total domestic video sales to around $3.6 million. During its first week on the Blu-ray charts, ending June 9, 2019, the movie ranked number 1 with approximately $1.67 million in spending. The following weeks saw the film drop to number 16 and then number 12, with weekly spending of around $343,000 and $215,000 respectively. The combined DVD and Blu-ray chart for that first week ranked the movie third overall by units and revenue, confirming it was a strong performer during its street date window. According to distributor listings for Warner Home Video releases, the film's estimated home market performance, roughly $3.6 million, ended up being very comparable to another DC animated film released that year, Batman Hush, and noticeably higher than Justice League vs. the Fatal Five. The movie's score, composed by Kevin Ripple, won a gold medal in the Global Music Awards 2019. Comic artist Freddie Williams II later commented that watching the first fight between Batman and the Shredder felt like an out-of-body experience. It was a moment that diverged significantly from the comic version of the story, and he admitted he wished he had been given the space to draw a fight like that himself. The crossover also generated its share of merchandise. In July, DC announced a line of action figures based on the film. A few months later, GameStop and Nickelodeon released a set of deluxe 2-packs pairing characters from both franchises. These included Batman with Leonardo, Robin with Raphael, Batgirl with Donatello, Alfred with Michelangelo, and Ra's al Ghul with the Shredder. The figures were designed by Andy Kuhn, who had also contributed to the film's early character designs. DC Collectibles also released an exclusive Bat Mikey figure for the San Diego Comic-Con. Critically, the movie was very well received. As of now, it holds a 100% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, along with an audience score of 89%. Because of that positive reception, the creators even discussed the possibility of a sequel. The idea would have explored the science fiction side of the TMNT universe, potentially introducing characters like Krang, Bebop, and Rocksteady. However, Warner Brothers frequently produced standalone animated films at the time. Unlike most DC animated projects, this crossover required the profits to be shared between multiple companies. That financial reality likely made a sequel less appealing. In the end, whether the story would continue depended entirely on how well the movie performed. For longtime Turtle fans, the movie included numerous Easter eggs and references to previous entries in the franchise, especially the 1990 live-action film. Several moments directly mirrored scenes from that movie. For example, the Turtles were shown watching the news from a manhole. Shredder dramatically landed in front of Batman during their confrontation, and Donatello used Bossa Nova as a battle cry. Later in the film, Shredder was unmasked, revealing the scars on his face. And just like in the original trilogy, gravity once again played a role in defeating the Shredder. There were also references to the Secret of the Ooze. One example was the scene in which Alfred politely offered napkins to Michelangelo and Raphael when they were eating pizza, mirroring a similar moment from that film. Another reference came from the way the Shredder managed to return after what seemed like a fatal defeat. The movie also included several callbacks to the 1987 animated series. One of Penguin's henchmen resembled Krang's android body, and during the fight with Mr. Freeze, Michelangelo defended himself with his nunchaku, performing moves that closely resembled those in the show's intro. The film also recreated the classic rooftop pose of the four turtles. Video game references appeared as well. One of the most recognizable moments came when Michelangelo knocked a foot soldier directly toward the camera, a clear homage to the arcade game Turtles in Time. And finally, not every reference came from the TMNT franchise. At one point, Raphael delivered a line inspired by Pink Floyd when he shouted, "Hey creature, leave the kid alone." According to writer Marley Halpern Grazer, by the end of the story, Batman had learned to give people a second chance and treat his team more like a family, learning from their mistakes along the way. In that sense, the movie was ultimately about family and teamwork, a theme that fit both franchises perfectly. The villains represented the opposite idea. They constantly distrusted each other and hated working together, and in the end, they lost because of it. The level of violence in the movie was also unusual for the Nickelodeon era of the Turtles, at least in animation. But there were reasons for it. Most DC animated films released by Warner Bros. Animation were rated PG-13, and the studio typically produced around 4 of them every year, usually adapting well-known comic book stories. In this case, the Turtles were simply inserted into that same production model. Just a year earlier, the Turtles had also appeared in the fighting game Injustice 2 via DLC, where they were portrayed in an extremely violent setting. That likely reinforced the idea that the characters could work in a slightly darker story than the average Nickelodeon cartoon. At the same time, this contrast was exactly what made the movie feel unusual. By 2019, Nickelodeon generally favored lighter and more heartwarming adventures with the Turtles, where violence was either toned down or played in a very cartoonish way, while character relationships were pushed to the forefront. I think there's room for both approaches. Still, for many older fans, especially those who grew up reading the comics in the 1990s, this movie probably represented the ideal balance of tone and action. It delivered a version of the Turtles that felt closer to the comics, something fans had mostly only experienced in print since Nickelodeon acquired the franchise. Personally, I think the highlight of the movie was the action and the comedy. Sure, Michelangelo sometimes sounded like he had been dropped on the floor as a child, but there were also some very clever lines throughout the film. Although, to be fair, many of those moments were lifted straight from the comic book. So what do you think about Batman vs. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? Did the darker tone and increased violence work for you? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. See you in the sewers.